I don't think I ever really believed everything.
And I realized that quite a few of the things didn't hold water.
The actual religions were man-made from wherever.
God? Who's God? What's God?
I think skepticism really is the first step.
Scientific zest and zeal for the real world.
That was it. I was an atheist from then on.
I became really enveloped in investigating truth and intellectual honesty.
Hi, I'm Red.
Hi, I'm Susan, and this is our friend Mitch, here to tell you about his road to atheism. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
Glad to be here. How are you?
Glad to be here.
So, in the beginning...
So I'm Caribbean and...
Where about? What island?
Dominica, not to be confused with the Dominican Republic.
Right.
It's in the Eastern Caribbean. Mm-hmm. Okay. Next to...
Barbados?
Not Barbados. Next to St. Lucia. But I was born there, but I was raised in the Bronx. Mm-hmm. And I was christened in the Catholic Church. And then I attended a Pentecostal church for many years. And then
Because of your family attended it, or?
It's Hispanic.
No, not Hispanic. Not Hispanic. The culture there is more like Haitian. They speak Creole. It's
okay. Mm-hmm.
They're mixed, black and white and French and all kinds of influences, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Christian in the Catholic Church. Then I went to a Pentecostal church just as a matter of convenience because it was near where I lived. And then when I got older, I went to a Lutheran church that was also in the same neighborhood. Mm-hmm. I think I was a bit fortunate because my father would often criticize the Catholic Church. So he is a religious person, and my family is religious, but I would say moderately religious. The level of religious fervor, I should say, that you would expect the average person to have, if that means anything, in a metropolitan area.
Okay, you say your father would criticize the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. In which way and how, for what reason?
Well,
was it on a philosophical basis?
He is one of those Christians that thinks there's a right way to worship God and a wrong way. So the Catholics are doing everything
the wrong way.
Okay.
For example, the idea of saints, making graven images, things like that. Just a lot of the elements of Catholicism that he thought were a little impure, that were going away from what Christianity is really about.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So even at a young age, that kind of empowered me to question religion as a whole. He didn't go the whole way, but it helped me a lot. Mm-hmm. So eventually in college, at first, I was studying engineering. And so I thought like an engineer. And I thought religion had some sort of practical purpose, so there was no way to answer the questions that I had to answer. And when I switched to mathematics, I became a much more logical person. And then I became really enveloped in investigating truth and intellectual honesty. So I got swept up into this new atheism movement, you know, with the horsemen, the non-horsemen, of course.
Yes.
That literature just started to appeal to my mind. You know, my mind was going into a phase now where I was more receptive to logic, and I really started to value evidence.
Okay, I want to hold you right there for a moment now. That's important. And the reason why I'm saying that is, I'm going to ask you this question.
Yes.
Did you observe any of the discussions? I know you said literature, but did you observe any of the discussions on YouTube as far as debates are concerned?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
I'm of that generation, the new atheism. Of course.
This is key, and this is one of the reasons why Pew Research, why you see the differences in there so fast within a relatively short interim, that I see the future coming along a lot faster than most people think due to the internet.
Yes.
Right? And to other social communication means. I see that happening. But especially debates, because that brings out a lot of the fallacies, a lot of things that just doesn't make any sense. And when you hear a debate you pick it up right away and you hear it. Would you concur to that?
I agree wholeheartedly.
Okay.
Who was of the four horsemen, who was your favorite?
Sam Harris.
Sam Harris.
Why do you like Sam Harris?
He has a particular brand of clarity and succinctness
Yes.
that it just really appeals to me and my personality. I used to have these really weak defenses to keep like these small remnants of my belief, mainly because of wishful thinking, you know? It's this idea, you want the good to triumph over evil, which is understandable, and you want to live forever. Of course.
And those are the basic things that religion bases on.
And I would be logical 90% of the time. And then 10% of the time, I would be passionate and illogical and gullible and stupid.
Naive.
And-
Don't say stupid, naive.
Well, sometimes naive, sometimes outright stupid. And you know, all those weak arguments I had got torn down. So eventually it did start with YouTube videos, and then it led to books, you know, and then it was a convincing argument. I learned a lot about free will. That's one thing, the debate there, or the illusion of free will. I know it's still a very debatable, you know, it's a contentious kind of topic. It's still there, but I learned a lot about, let's say, pain and suffering, for example. There are certain topics that when you are stuck in religious thought and theistic thought, you sort of avoid. And the main thing I learned from Harris is to confront those problems, confront the issues that you see. You know, when I was younger, even when I was really young, let's say age 6, I would think about the pain and suffering in the world, and religious people would always have some words to give you, you know? Why does so much pain and suffering occur? Because Jesus had to die to so you can do this.
And it's a mystery.
Well,
certain things.
is that really an answer to the question I just posed? And even if it is an answer, is that a sufficient answer? If God could do anything, why do it that way?
Yeah.
That seems to be the worst way to do anything.
Because he works in mysterious ways.
That's it.
So Harris had this ability to, instead of trying to navigate away from these difficult, when I say has this ability not to just navigate from these difficult areas, but to really confront them, you know? So this is, that was one of the things that really appealed to me.
He was also interested, and he got his PhD
In neuroscience.
In neuroscience, right? Which basically, intellectually, he's working on the mind as far as neuroscience is concerned. That's very important. That's key. And your feelings about that?
Yeah, this whole point is valuing evidence. You need to back up these claims. So logical evidence is certainly evidence. But as a neuroscientist, he's certainly in the right field to back up the claims he makes about
I would agree.
his criticisms of
agree.
religion and certain elements of philosophy like compatibilism. You know, he's a determinist. Even though his good friend Daniel Dennett is a compatibilist, that must be a problem. Another big thing was politics. It was current events. I found that religious people were doing things in recent years, let's say post 9/11, that were negatively impacting hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, based on ideas that they don't have evidence for or don't have strong evidence for. And that, to me, just struck me as being very unethical. And those same guys, of course, were guilty, or well, one of them was guilty, is still guilty, of that crusade against gay rights.
Yeah.
So it's possible, although I find it very unlikely, that someone could come up with a very reasonable, logical argument for why homosexuals should not have certain rights that they desire to have, perhaps. I don't think it's possible, but it might be in the realm of possible.
Well, they don't want special rights, they just want equal rights.
Well, for example, if you could prove that there is definitely some kind of conspiracy or there's some kind of deliberate fraud or something, like people are trying to take advantage of some specific law in order to gain some kind of monetary
Well, what they did was
advantage.
they would come up with this moral bit that if your parents, for example, if you had two gay men, okay, who were married to each other or lived with each other, that they had no right to raise up a child because the child would turn to be gay. What proof did they have of that?
Absolutely.
And I think this is what you're talking about.
Yeah, but
And most gay people are the children of heterosexuals.
Yes, that's right. And
don't want
and
the
that's
children.
exactly what I would throw to them in their face. What about them?
But to continue,
Yes, I'm sorry.
Where I was really going with that is that where the disagreement lies, the people who are against gay rights, it's always because, not always, but it seems to be primarily because of religious beliefs.
That's right.
Not because of anything else.
That's where it all comes from.
So if it were anything else, we would be able to investigate those claims and say, oh, nonsense. There is no conspiracy going on. Some people are like this, some people are like that. We need to treat them equally under the law. That's what it's about. But that's not what it is.
It's the Bible.
People have really the Bible or the Quran or the Torah. And a lot of times, the individuals themselves, they don't even come up with the idea that homosexuality
They're just repeating
is wrong.
it.
Exactly. Some religious leader tells them, and they go, look, if you're going to be a Christian, you have to believe in this 100%. You have to do everything you're supposed to do.
You can't question.
Yep. And when you vote, you have to bring your religion into the voting. And I said, wait a minute. Separation of church and state. Whatever happened
But
to
this
that?
is a Christian nation. Didn't you know that?
It is the voting bloc. This is with not only with the certain
Yeah.
Christians, certain evangelical groups, but with
And
certain Jewish
Jews,
groups,
yes.
certain Mormons. They all have their little voting blocks that if they vote as a bloc, they have that control.
So the politicians
politically.
have to appease them.
Right. Well, this is again, not to change the subject, but this is something that's important. The way your recent victories that have gone out there now, they're starting to realize, and also population-wide, things are changing. You're getting, instead of 17%, now it's a 23% of people.
Nonners.
Oh, nonners, exactly. You see? And that's important because that means you're showing that you're getting more political influence. And when, as you remember, I'm sure that when Sam Harris ran a little bit of flack there when he mentioned that instead of calling us atheists, that we should be called by another name.
Yeah, I recall this incident. I
Yes.
believe he was, on one occasion, he was speaking to a group of skeptics.
He was speaking, yes,
Yes,
exactly.
in
DC.
In
Yep.
DC, that's right. What was your...
I think, as usual, he has a point. I believe his line of thinking is that you don't call yourself a non-astronomer or a non-astrologer.
Yes,
you don't define yourself by the things you are not.
That's
And
right.
most atheists agree to this definition of it being an absence of faith.
But it was, you didn't want to label us, and this is the whole thing. You don't label yourself because you're putting yourself in a corner. You're standing out when you should be the norm. You
Yeah.
shouldn't be
We are
labeling
the
yourself
norm.
as saying you're a non-this or
We're all
non-that.
born not believing.
Well, I'm not saying whether Sam is right or wrong about this, because this is more of an issue of strategy. We're all on the same side
Right.
here. I'm not dogmatic about it. I'm open-minded. So I'm willing to discuss different kinds of strategy. As long as the goal, we all have the same goal.
We all agree.
That's
And
right.
the goal is to get rid of this idea where people, as Sam Harris likes to say, pretend to believe in things. They pretend to know things that they don't know.
So
Okay.
you've come out to your family? Or
Yeah,
you
of
just... Okay, well, you never know.
It actually took me a long, this was a very slow, gradual process. So I started out as someone who was religious, I took the Bible figuratively at first. So I believed in God and Jesus Christ, but I said, obviously, the supernatural world is illogical. If the supernatural were natural, it would just be natural. There's no need for the word supernatural. I used to think, well, no matter what God does, there must be some impact that is felt in the physical world because the physical world is the world. It's the only thing that we have. And then, slowly, like I said, I got more logical. I got into mathematics and just elementary logic, just basic things. And religion just kept on losing ground. Like more and more, it didn't make sense. There was just so many, points from like, well, that's illogical, that's a contradiction. What can I salvage from this now that I've discovered, now that I've become convinced that this is false, or that there isn't enough evidence for this, what remains?
Yes.
And eventually there was nothing left.
Yeah, mathematics is a good example of that.
That was it.
Okay, mathematics is a good example.
There's
Add up a couple
tons of
things like that.
evidence that would allow anyone who approaches the matter with intellectual honesty, if you have the intelligence, the ability, the resources, if you investigate it honestly, to find out approximately how old is the Earth, approximately how old is the universe. Light,
13.8 billion years.
light is the strongest piece
That's right.
of evidence, and it's. Don't you think it takes time for light to move from one place to another place? So if you see something and it's really, really far away, doesn't the light have to travel from there to your eye to be able to see it? Yeah, so things like that, certainly. 4 or 5 years ago, I could say, yeah, I'm completely an atheist now. I am definitely not religious. And
Was
this is
that
not true.
due to the internet? No, close. Good point,
A
buddy.
lot of things. Like I said, it was
And the YouTube you were talking about.
politics, current events.
Yes,
And I was
definitely.
just really dismayed. I was ashamed to be a human being. I was like, we're in 2015,
Yes.
and
The 21st century,
Yeah.
the third millennium, 50 years into the space age, and we're still clinging to
And
this
I'm like,
Bronze Age.
all these people writing books, PhDs, master's degrees, literate people, intelligent people, defending things they used to believe in when they weren't so intelligent. We're just mired in this misery and war everywhere. And here's a key point. Sometimes the problem isn't religion, but sometimes the problem is religion. And very few people, it's just not politically correct to ever say that.
Okay.
And I got fed up. So it was just a slow build,
Would you say that
Yeah.
under those circumstances, having a ability to see right from wrong, logically from illogical, that is, okay. You have to understand how people think. People will not want to make that crossover to say, well, you're right, it really is illogical. And they do that out of fear. Fear that they're not going to go,
to heaven.
that they're going to go. And that,
Or worse,
and
that
all of a
there's
sudden
nothing at all.
Yeah, and all of a sudden they say, well, I don't want to even get into that.
Yeah.
That's because of that fear.
Yes.
They're not saying it to you, but
No.
they're transmitting that language to you.
Yeah.
In so many ways, they're sending you a signal. That's the reason why they don't want to do that. Now, religion has some good points. It's sort of like the poor man's psychiatrist.
Yeah.
But then again, you look at all the evil that has come out of that, and you wonder what the benefits versus the other way around. What's there? And that's where we have problems in today. Almost every social endeavor and problems that we have, you can base it back to religion. You can base it back to the Bible. Whatever Bible it is, Abrahamic, whatever it is. And there's a problem. The misogyny of women, how women are treated as second-class citizens, how some humans are treated as second-class citizens.
Well, unfortunately, that's most religions. I mean, even
That's
in
where the-
India and other places.
And that's where he was saying you have to make a decision as to find out, even though there's some benefits, there is some problems that outweigh those benefits.
I would just like to make it clear. Like I said,
Yes.
I'm not blaming religion for everything, but I'm just saying, there are some issues where clearly the source of the problem is religion. Period. That's it. And people don't confront that.
There is a strong feeling against anybody who does not have religion or who is an atheist.
Oh yeah, in the black community,
You know
and the
that,
Caribbean
especially the black community, and
Oh, yeah.
especially among women too.
I mean, all you can do is really educate yourself and try to think openly, think rationally about what you're interested in. I think my dad's a little bit upset at me, but he's a very loving person. We always got into argument, even though we have a lot in common. On politics, we're both on the left. We like history, we like sports. Somehow we always find things to argue about. I don't know how people who could be so similar can argue so much. And like I said, he's not your average dogmatic Christian. He says some very strange things that other Christians of the same ilk would think, this is blasphemous. You can't say that. For example, he doesn't believe in hell. He's very interested in Judaism. because the Jewish people, as you know, as is known, they have a covenant with God, and God is not supposed to break His word. So the way my dad interprets that is, well, God can't break His word. So the Jewish people are special people, whether we want to, whether it seems unfair or not, they are. So he has a special attraction to that. Well, to get back to your question, because I was still thinking, I was considering the question you raised earlier about how people can break out of that hold that religion has. I think you have to be lucky enough to be in a supportive community, in an open community. If not, you may have to make some tough decisions. I mean, you can't expect people to accept you. It's asking for too much. They either will or they won't. But for future generations, one thing that really needs to be addressed is indoctrination. I think even if there's some reasonable-minded religious people, and we can convince them, if we can convince our friends and our neighbors to teach their children in a more universal way, teach them comparative religion as opposed to just...
I was just going to ask you that. Do you believe that the current indoctrination is more or less child abuse?
I've heard that before.
You know what it really means when they say that?
Yeah, well, you know, that's a pejorative term. It's I don't think it's necessary to say child abuse. It's wrong.
It's very strong to say child abuse.
Yeah.
But think of it as to what damage it actually does.
You take your child out of school, you teach it at home your religion, very little else. They become adults. How are they going to support themselves? You're condemning them actually to a life of poverty.
If I were to teach hate, out and out, hate this person, that person's no good, hate that person, that's an abusive way to bring up a child. But in the Bible is a soft way of doing it, and it's the same thing. How I treat my women, how do I treat my fellow neighbor, or whatever it is.
How do you treat your slaves?
That's my slaves, things of that nature. Do you follow what I'm saying? That when I say child abuse.
Here's the issue. When you're young, you're not yourself yet. You're becoming who you will be. And
you want to start on a free road,
yes.
Right? You want to start on a neutral road.
Yep.
To find and search on your own to find the right ways rather than being coerced, whether physically or mentally, to go one way, and then you have to struggle, or as you say, be lucky, to find that other way to get back.
Yeah, the issue is...
form of abuse.
I know from my personal experience, you know, I thought I was a pretty smart guy. My parents said I was pretty smart and everything. When I went to church, I just went to church. My parents said, you go to church. You do this. You do that. There was no discussion of whether or not it was true or not. There was no discussion of whether or not another religion might be true or yours might be true, which is tolerance.
Or comparative.
These people study that. Yeah, whatever. You're doing this. I'm like this. Go here. That's the problem. That should not be happening. That should never be happening. When you're an adult and you're more reasonable, when you've developed and you've grown into yourself, when you've developed your brain a bit more, you know, at that moment, when you're older, I think is when it's fair for you as an individual to take a certain path.
Okay.
It doesn't make any sense at a young age to have people who are in a position of power and respect and love force you to do something and not be open to have any discussions about whether or not this thing is true.
Then that leads me to the next question, which is, and I don't mean to put you on the spot like this.
And sometimes it's too late, of course. That's another big problem.
Well, what about
for 10 years?
You don't have any? Do you have children?
No, I do not.
Okay. What about if you have children? Would you teach them to be an atheist, or would you not say much, or just give them general information as comparative religions, including atheism? How would you bring up your children then?
Well, I'm only human. I mean, I can make mistakes, but hopefully in the future, the way, like I said, comparative religion, you teach your...
What would you teach your children?
You teach your children religion, about the religions of the world in a historical kind of way. And that's what you do.
Okay, so you wouldn't gear them or send them in a direction of atheism or religion. You would play it neutral, or would you take one or the other? Or would you make it, since you're an atheist, came about to that, would you say,
I don't know, why would I try to have an argument with someone who is not capable of arguing with me? I'm only going to argue with someone who has the tools so they can debate me fairly. A child is not in that position.
Not necessarily
so
an argue with, but guidance for that person. I'm saying that because, and here's the reason why I'm saying that. When a child is growing up, they should not be necessarily influenced one way or the other, but shown the evidence or the path that's out there and both roads rather than just one. Would you agree to that?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
Show all the different roads that are out there.
Yes, all the different roads.
Rather than guiding them one way or the other, even though the person who's religious has their reasons why they want them, and the person who's atheist says, well, that's contradictory, it doesn't make any sense. That doesn't give that person, and I'm sure you agree, a right to say you should go down the atheist path.
I think logic is pretty tricky, even for adults. If you tell someone, here's a proposition, what's the inverse of this statement? What's the converse? What's the contrapositive? Even for adults, it's very difficult. Someone can be saying something, then contradicting themselves a minute later, and they really feel like they're not. They don't want to contradict themselves, but they simply don't know that they are. So imagine trying to explain that to a 6-year-old. I don't think a 6-year-old has the faculties to really engage in a really tough, logical discussion about why daddy likes this road because it makes sense. I think instead it just has to be a real historical kind of breakdown.
Well, as a child, I loved the Disney movies.
Yeah.
So I would read fairy tales. And reading fairy tales led me to reading all these different mythologies. So there I'd be in Sunday school and trying to find out why this bunch of fantastic stories are called myths.
Right.
And this bunch of fantastic stories are supposed to be genuine and authentic. And I kept waiting for me to be presented with the Bible Volume 2 with all sorts of authentication and verification. I'm still waiting.
I was recently teaching at I probably shouldn't say so many, dude. I was recently teaching at a middle school, and right now I'm about to start teaching at a different school.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Very good. Do you like teaching?
Yeah, I love teaching. Absolutely. I love logic. I love math. I'm a compassionate person, an empathetic person. And I like truth.
But you go for the truth. I was just going to say, you believe in following the truth. Would you like to make a statement to those people out there who have the same like-minded ways, a philosophical way that you're describing yourself? What would you have for them what would you like to say to them?
Good luck. Openly discuss your arguments. Don't be a closet atheist. That doesn't really help society. You've got to contribute. Try to speak to others. That's what I would say.
I want to thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Great.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.